We're not going to solve. I don't think.
All right. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Zevachim, Daf Yod Gimel. We've already learned our last Mishnah in the Perek. It was a very long Mishnah that we learned yesterday. Today we're going to start unpacking that Mishnah. And as we'll soon see, one of the core elements of our Mishnah is something totally out of left field about whether or not the bodies of the people who died in the Mabul landed in Eretz Yisrael. We'll have to see what that means a little bit later. Machlokes, Reish Lakish, and Rabbi Yochanan. But before that, let's get started. The Gemara opens on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, 5 lines down. Mai chutz migita. So if you were to look back at the beginning of the Mishnah, at the beginning of this parak, you'll see that when it comes to the din of para aduma, the first line of the Mishnah on the blot prior says that para schata shesarfa chutz migita. If something was burned outside of Gita, which we don't know what that is, so the halacha is ein chayav in. But what is this parameter of chutz migita? So this is the discussion of the Gemara. Amar Reish Lakish chutz mimakam habadukla. It has to be a place that's been checked for dead bodies. That's what Rashi says on the right side in a margin. Dibur hamascha mimakam habadukla l'shochta sham she'ein tachteha kever hatahom. We know, of course, that when it comes to tuma, the tuma is ola ad la rakia. So, and the para aduma has to be prepared b'tahara. We're soon going to see a Gemara that we've seen in other Masechtas about how careful we had to prepare the para aduma. There were families that dedicated their lives to raising their children to be perfectly tahor, as we'll soon see. So this is what Reish Lakish said, is that if you do it michutz migita, that means you did it in a place that wasn't checked. Migita means that it was checked. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan v'halo kol Eretz Yisrael b'dukahi. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, we have a presumption in halacha that that Eretz Yisrael is beduka. In other words, bodies are always buried in cemeteries. They're not buried in random places. And this was actually, we know this from other places in Chazal, in the Gemara, that we have this concept called Tumas Eretz Ha'amim. Outside of Eretz Yisrael, we actually assume a din derabanan of Tuma, but in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan was of the opinion that it was B'dukahi. So therefore, it can't be that Chutz Migita is talking about whether or not Eretz Yisrael was B'duka, because Pashat that it was B'duka from a mace. So Reish Lakish holds that Migita is talking about a mace. What does Rav Yochanan say? 7-8 lines down. Rav Yochanan kigon sheshachta lifnim min chomas Yerushalayim. You did it inside of the walls of Yerushalayim, but not in the appropriate spot, and that is the wrong place. And therefore, that's what he says. Chutz migita is a big machlokas here between the Tanoim, between the Amoraim. He says the Gemara, maybe it was outside of the walls, but not near the Pesach. We already have a Mari Makum like that, and perhaps Rabbi Yochanan should follow the Shita of Ada Bar Amar Shenemar v'Shachat v'Hiza. We have these two words; they're in different psukim, but we do have some type of hekesh that's generated between them. What is the hekesh? Mahaza asa keneged Pesach. Just like the sprinkling needs to be done opposite the Pesach of the eastern wall of the Beis Hamikdash. Afshchitasa keneged Pesach. That's where you need to do these actions. If you do it somewhere else, that's what it means. Chutz megita. So why didn't Rav Yochanan use that drush of Rav Ada bar Ava? If you want to say because Rav Yochanan is not willing to make that kind of drasha, the kind of drasha where you have a hekesh from two words that are not similar, Zuhi Shiva, Zuhi Bia, that was one type, and here we have the drush of a Shachat V'Hiza. No, that's not true. We know that Rav Yochanan makes these types of drashas. V'ha'itmar, skipping all of the parentheses, skipping the next 4 lines. V'ha'itmar, we know that Rav Yochanan makes these complex hekeshim, because as we know, sarfa shelo keneged Pesach, if the sreifa of the para aduma was not done keneged the eastern Pesach of the Beis Hamikdash, Rav Yochanan amar psula v'Rav Shai amar kshera. Machlokes amarem. Now let's look at Rav Yochanan's svara as to why sarfa shelo keneged Pesach was psula. Rav Yochanan amar psula v'saraf v'hiza. So we see that he does make these difficult types of hekeshim. So if you want to say, Rav Yochanan, that the answer is not like Reish Lakish, that's fine. But why did you make a different ukimta? Just follow what Rav Ada bar Ava says. And what was before we get to the answer, what was the reason for Rav Oshaya? We're a third of the way down. Rav Oshaya amar kshera. Al Pirsha Yisrof Makom Sheporeshes Lemisa Sham Teisrefasa. The place that it's taken out to die, meaning it's brought outside of the Makam HaMikdash. That's where the Sreifa needs to take place, and he learns it from a different part of the pasuk. So all of this is to say that we have a question on Rav Yochanan. Why didn't Rav Yochanan, once he deviated from Reish Lakish, why didn't he hold like Rav Ada bar Abba's drasha that we were talking about a case of Shachta Shloka Neged Pesach? Instead, Rav Yochanan wanted to say that the case we were dealing with was Shachta Lifnei Min Chomas Yerushalayim. Why did we say that? So the Gemara says, Amre, really the answer is in regards to Reish Lakish, Lo mi baya kamar. Not only this, but even that. Lo mi baya chutz lechoma dirachu keiracha. I don't need you to tell me that if the para aduma was brought far outside the walls of Yerushalayim, that would be problematic. Even if it was very close to the base of Mikdash, albeit in the wrong place, perhaps it's kosher, kamash malan. That's why Reish Lakish, that's why Rav Yochanan, didn't have to give that answer. It was a lomi baya. It's both. It's both what Reish Lakish said. It's both what Rav Yochanan says and what Rav Ada bar Abba says. Now, what is at the core of this machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish? Let's remember where we started today. We asked, "My chutz migita," and Reish Lakish said we had to make sure that the place where the para aduma was brought was bduka, that it was checked from a mace. Rav Yochanan says, no, Eretz Yisrael is bduka. We don't have to worry about bodies being buried in random places. So Amar Mar, let's analyze what this machlokes is about. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan, va'alo kol Eretz Yisrael b'dukahi. Rabbi Yochanan says back to Reish Lakish, that was the line that we had at the top of this Gemara, 6-7 lines down, that when Reish Lakish gave his answer, Rabbi Yochanan was like, what are you talking about? All of Eretz Yisrael is b'duka. There's no reason that you would. That can't be what chutz megita means, Reish Lakish. Eretz Yisrael is b'duka. Don't tell me that it's about making sure the paraduma is prepared with sanctity. It's not true. So b'mai kamiflage, what is it that Reish Lakish and Rav Yochanan are arguing about? When Reish Lakish says that Eretz Yisrael is not b'duka, and Rav Yochanan says that Eretz Yisrael is b'duka, it is checked from a mace. So look at this answer. Mar savar yorad mabul Eretz Yisrael. One shita, the shita of Reish Lakish holds that the flood of Noach, the waters also were over Eretz Yisrael. Umar savar lo yorad, and according to Rav Yochanan, no, the waters of the Mabul did not impact Eretz Yisrael. This poses, of course, a gravity question of how could it be that the waters have flooded the rest of the world but not Eretz Yisrael? Perhaps what it means is that none of the bodies were buried there, as we'll soon see that none of the bodies fell there. They fell in other places. We'll see on the Yamud Beis that is one possibility. But this is the core of the machlokas of our case. It's totally out of left field. We wanted to know what chutz migita meant by para aduma, and now we're talking about the mabul. Reish Lakish held that the mabul didn't affect Eretz Yisrael in regards to Mason, and Rav Yochanan said it did. Reish Lakish said that the mabul did impact Eretz Yisrael. If I said the opposite, yeah, and therefore. Correct. Therefore, we were concerned. So chutz megita means you didn't check. That's certainly what I meant. Maybe it's not what I said. Nice correction. Thank you. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak u'shneim mikra echad darshu. They both learned from the same exact pasuk. You gotta love Yiddishkeit. Two Jews, same pasuk, completely opposite implications. How so? Well, sometimes it's all about the tone. Let's see how this pasuk is learned. This pasuk is a pasuk that can be found in Yechezkel. The pasuk reads, "Ben Adam emor lo at eretz lo mitoharahi lo gushma b'yom zam." So says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan savar atmuhe mitamakra. It's read rhetorically, Eretz Yisrael mi lo mitohorat. He says, are you not pure? Right? Klum yardu alecha gshamim b'yom zam. Were there any waters that fell on you on that day of anger? So if it's read rhetorically, the way to understand the pasuk is that no water fell on Eretz Yisrael. Reish Lakish savar, no, you don't read it rhetorically. Kapashte, you read it regular. Eretz lo mitoharoat. You are not a pure land. It's not rhetorical. Just read it. Stop adding question marks. Milo yardu alecha gshamim b'yom zam. Was there no water that fell on you during that day? Gravity. A pasha, you're going to get wet when the whole world is in a flood, right? So this is their machlokes. And now we're going to ask a slew of questions, some on Reish Lakish and some on Rav Yochanan in their respective shitas. But let's just get clarity, because clearly I don't have clarity, because I just made this mistake 1 minute ago. Reish Lakish was of the opinion that there was a Mabul, the Mabul of Noach did impact Eretz Yisrael, and therefore there were Mesim scattered throughout Eretz Yisrael that were buried, but at this point, by their time in history, was buried below the ground. But we have to be concerned about Tuma Ola Ad L'Rakia. So he says that that's what Chutz Migita means, that we have to worry about people's bodies, corpses that were buried there. Mashen Ken Rav Yochanan was of the opinion that that is not the concern. The Mabul of Noach did not impact Eretz Yisrael. So let's see question number one. Esvei Reish Lakish the Rav Yochanan. Reish Lakish says to Rav Yochanan, hang on 1 second. If you're right, Rav Yochanan, that there were no Mesim to be worried about, then you have a brisa to explain from Maseches Sukkah, Tosefta and Para, as you can see, or Mishnah and Para. Let's take a look. Chatzeros hayu birushalayim, benuyos al hasela. There were communities that were built on top of a sela, on top of a rock. The tachtein chalul, mipnei kever hatahom. Underneath them was a space so that even if there were corpses underneath, if there is that tefach of halal, then that interrupts the ola ad l'rakia. Umevian nashim ubaros v'yoldos umegadlo sham b'nehem lepara. And women who were expecting would move there. It became the new birthing center. All of the women who were pregnant, or a handful of the women who were pregnant, would raise their sons there. Umevian shvarim, and they would bring animals there. The al-gabein dalsos, and they would have these types of boards, literally translates as doors. The tinokos yoshvin aleim, and the little kids who were going to service the para aduma would sit on top of those boards so that they wouldn't become tameh. And as for the dishes that they would use, the kosos shel even biyadon, umalu v'yashvu b'mekoman, and then they would do everything that they needed to do. They would stay right there. Says Reish Lakish to Rav Yochanan, if Eretz Yisrael is Beduka, what's with all the hard work? Why is everybody twisting into a pretzel to make sure that the Para Aduma is protected? Eretz Yisrael is Beduka. Elamai, says Reish Lakish, based on the price of the Tosefta from Para. No, Eretz Yisrael is not Beduka. Must be that the Mabul did hit. Amar Rav Huna Berid, Rav Yoshua, no. Rav Yochanan is just pointing out, Ma'ale asu b'para. It was all chumras. It was all a higher level that we wanted to do in order to treat the para aduma with the appropriate sanctity. It's sacrosanct. We want to make sure that we're treating it the right way. Afal pi, that you're right that Eretz Yisrael is beduka, but ma'ale asu b'para. That's question and answer number one. Question.
How long did it get in that same, so to speak?
I mean, it appears that they lived their lives there until their avoda, whatever avoda they were doing with the para aduma was done. What?
There was some part of the.
Yeah, I remember from there. I feel like it has to do with water.
Specifically, and that's what these children were for.
Yeah, I'm sure Rashi says. I didn't look it up. Let's see if Rashi, if we can quickly, yeah. Asuba, Shar Milos Harbe, Shenecha Bakohanim Nogan Bo Kol Shivas Meprishasu Havu Elu Tinokos Nogan Bo Umazin Alav. The Tinokos were mazin on people who became tameh. That's what Rashi says. Yeah, he knew it had to do something with water, so they would.
Tinokos Nogan Bo Umazin Alav. They were metameh the Kohen Gadol, the host and leave them shows and do. I don't remember exactly why. And then they would be the ones that would sprinkle it on this Kohen. Or
something like that.
There's something there.
Some Torah there.
They had some limud where they would dafka make him tameh, so I think they learned if he was ever tameh, he could never be involved. They would make him tameh a week before, so
and then be matahar,
and they would be part of the process, and then he would be mazif.
You have a good memory. Yeah, but. Yeah, that's what Rashi says. The beginning of Rashi says that explicitly. Demishum demitamenes hakohen asorif es apar mibnei tzdukim. They did that on purpose. Therefore, asuba she'ar milos harbesh ein achava kohanim nogin bo kol shivas meprishaso. Elu hatinokos nogin bo umazan Allah. The kids were together. Very good. Thank you. Esvei, we have another brisa, but this is a reverse question. Now it's Esvei Rabbi Yochanan on the Reish Lakish. We're 12 lines from the bottom. Of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. So says the Gemara. Now we're asking against Reish Lakish. So what are we anticipating? Reish Lakish was of the opinion that Eretz Yisrael was not beduka from a mace. So now let's see what the question is. Pamachas matzu atzamos belishkas dir ha'etzim. They found a human bone in the room that held the wood in the Beis Hamikdash, one of the four corners of the Ezras Nashim. Ubikshu ligzor tuma al Yerushalayim. They're like, oh, what do we see from here? We see that Eretz Yisrael is not Paduka because they found the bones, they found the mace, they found the skeleton. Omar Rabbi Yeshua Raglav Amar Lo Busho Chlima Hilanu Shenigzor Tuma al Ir Avosenu Aye Meise Mabu Aye Meise Nebuchadnezzar. End of Brisa. Now, Midika Amar Hachi Lav Lamemra Delo Havu. His rhetorical questions seem to imply he's like, yeah, you found a bone. That doesn't mean that the Mabul was here. It doesn't mean that that Nebuchadnezzar, the people who died during that Tkufa weren't buried properly. This is not what it means. It says the Gemara, Tamech, according to you, Harugin Nebuchadnezzar and Hachi Nami Delo Havu. Are you saying that there weren't people who were killed? All the paintings we see of like the pillaging of the Rahman al-Islam, what happened? Pashat, there were dead people there. Ela Havu, there were dead people. Ufaninhu, and the bodies were removed. Zaka got involved. Everyone was buried properly. So Hachanami, even if you want to say that there was, a mabul, but people were buried properly. So we tried to ask on Reish Lakish, and it did not work. We're going to skip the next four words, the last two on this page and the first two on the top of this page. All of this is Girsas Rashi. Nehi de ifni mirushalayim mikula Eretz Yisrael lo ifni. It says the Gemara, you're right that there was some degree of cleanup, but it was only true in Yerushalayim. It wasn't true of all of Eretz Yisrael, and that's how Reish Lakish can still maintain his shita. That was version 1 of this question. But version 2 on the top of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, and we'll be heading to the 2 dots toward the bottom of this page, and then tomorrow should be a shorter blot. I am most likely not going to be here tomorrow night. I have to Baruch Hashem, multiple good occasions that I probably won't be here, so I'm just going to double check that that Rabbi Handler will be here. It says the Gemara as follows: Ika da Amre, second line of the page, Esvei Rish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, Aye Meisei Mabul, Aye Meisei Nebuchadnezzar, My lab midahani havu. Hani Nami Havu, just like we know Nebuchadnezzar was there, so too we know the Mabul was there, says the Gemara. No, me the area who says Hakida Isa. What does one historical occurrence have to do with another? Yes, we know Nebuchadnezzar killed people and they were buried properly, but Mechatesi that therefore means that what kind of tzushtel is that therefore the Mabul happened? Not necessarily true. So next question, our third one of the night. Esvei, and here on the side here it says Esvei Reish Lakish le Rav Yochanan. So now we know the type of question we're going to see. The pasuk says in Bereshis in Parshas Nach, Mikol Hasher Becharava Mesu, anything that was Becharava Mesu. So it says Reish Lakish Bishlama Ledidi De Aminu Yarad Mabu LeEretz Yisrael Mishum Hachi Mesu. I could understand that's why the pasuk says they died. Ela Ledidach, but according to you that there was no Mabul in Eretz Yisrael. Amai Mesu, says the Gemara, Mishum Havla, they died because of heat. Keder Rav Chizda, the Amar Rav Chizda, Beroschen Kilkilu, Uveroschen Nidonu. That they died because Beroschen, referring to Shechva Zera, that they were involved in those Isurim, and therefore Veroschen Nidonu, Dechsiv Hacha Vayashoku Hamayim. Vayashoku is not a common modern parlance word, as far as I know. But that is what it says over there. How do we know what it means? Because so there we see that by the story of Esther, that the anger of the king was cooled down. So that's what Vayashoku means. The Vayashoku also means cooled down, which means that it must have been that it was hot. So now we see Vayashoku that it cooled down after they were killed. And Ikad Amre, another version of this, is Esvei of Yochanan. The Reish Lakish, the question was reversed. Mikol Asher Becharava Mesu Bishlam Aladidi, says Rav Yochanan, Daminu Lo Yarad Mabul Eretz Yisrael Mishum Hachi Havu Charava. That's why I call the land dry. Charava means dried land. Ela Ladidach, according to you, Reish Lakish, you say that there was a Mabul Mai Charava. Why would you say that the land was dried? It should have been covered with water. Reish Lakish, if you said the Mabul was there, the language is wrong. It shouldn't have been Charava. So says the Gemara, Charava Shaisa Meikara. Reish Lakish would tell you the land was dried before it got covered by the Mabul. Why was it called that way? Keder Rav Chizda. The Amar Rav Chizda, Bedor HaMabul lo nigzra gzeira la dagim shabayam. We know that the that the fish of the ocean, of the yam, of the sea, were not affected. Shenemar mikol asher b'charava mesu. Only those who were on the ground died. V'lo dagim shebayam. B'shlema lemando amar lo yarad ma'abul Eretz Yisrael. I could understand, according to Reish Lakish, who said that there was no ma'abul in Eretz Yisrael. Hainu dekam rima hasam. The rima was a very, very large animal, and this animal, if you take a look at Rashi on the last of the short lines, on the fourth line of the page, Rashi says, "Hainu de kamri mahasam haraim zachar unakeva shehu gadol beinu yachol ikanis lateva amdu sham." It was a massive male-female animal. I don't think we have a lot of animals like that. We have animals that can reproduce themselves, but we don't have. I don't know if that's exactly the same thing. I don't know. So it says the Gemara, if you want to say that there was no mabul, that's how this animal, the rima, could exist. Elalamanda Amar Yorad, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that there was a mabul, then I don't understand. Rima hechakam. Then how did the animal fit in the teva? Amar Rav Yana, Gurios hichnisu b'teva. Don't worry, the adults didn't fit in the teva, but the newborns of the rima fit in the teva. Says the Gemara, no, it didn't. This was quite the birth. Amar Rabba Bar Barchana, Lididi Chazili, or Zila de Rima Basiyoma. I saw a newborn of the Rima that was only 1 day old. V'have kehar tavor. It was massive, like the size of har tavor. What were the measurements? V'har tavor kamahavya. Arba'in parse, 40 parsa. Mashcha de tzavara tlasa parsa. Just the length of its neck was 3 parsa. Marbasa de resha parso palga. The shape of the head was a parsa and a half. Ramakava. Rama, this animal of kava, if it would go to the bathroom with Sachar Yardana, when it went to the bathroom, it would defecate. It would change the course of water of the Jordan River. This was a huge animal, even as a newborn, even as a 1 day old. Pashut, that wouldn't fit inside the teva. That should be obvious. Halfway down on Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Rabbi Yochanan, you're right. Rosho hichniso the teva. Only his head would go in the teva, but the rest of his body didn't go in the teva. It was just in the water, but his head went in the. Okay, he says, I don't know how we get it waterproof, but that's what the Gemara says. V'amar mar, even his head doesn't fit. We said mar basa deresha parsa upalga, the diameter of the head of this rima was 1.5 parsa, which is huge. Ella rosh chotmo hichnisu teva. Only the tip of his nose was inside the teva. How can you say that? V'amar Rabbi Yochanan lo yorad mabul Eretz Yisrael. We didn't realize who was talking a second ago. Look up 3 lines. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Roshu Echnisu L'Teva. Why is Rabbi Yochanan talking? We're just talking about Eretz Yisrael. The Rima was in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan held there was no Mabul in Eretz Yisrael. So why are you talking? You're the wrong Jew to talk. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Lo Yarad Mabul Eretz Yisrael. Why are you even talking? So he says no. They were very mature in their arguments. He was talking about the other person. No. According to Reish Lakish, this is what he would have to say. The teva was moving around up and down, and that's what Rashi says. Kasag teva, a third of the way down. Rashi says, "Vateva mehaleches al pnei hamayim migvo lenamuch nimtza chotamo nishmetes min teva umeis." The Gemara says if his feet touch it when the water starts going down, he's going to fall out. And if he's hanging up in there with hundreds of feet of water under it, it's very hard to hold on by the tip of your nose. Reish Lakish, don't worry. Karnav kashro b'teva. His horns were tied up against the teva, and that prevented him from falling, even with the waves and waiting waters. Amar of Chizda, I don't understand. Anshe dor mabel baroskin kilkalu baroskin nidonu. How could the Rima have even survived? The waters were boiling hot. No, according to your question, how could even the teva have lasted if the waters? We know that it was covered in zephes, but if the water is in fact boiling, the zephes won't keep it waterproof forever. At some point, it's going to melt it down. So not only that, we know that Og Melech HaBashan, according to some, held on to the outside. How could he have survived from the hot temperatures of the water? We're not talking about like the hot mikveh. We're talking about very, 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 very hot water. Again, hard to fathom the temperatures. The waters that were right around the teva, miraculously, says the Gemara, were a lower, more tolerable temperature. Says the Gemara, Ularib Shimon ben Lakish, Nehinami diyorad mabul Eretz Yisrael. You're right that there was a mabul in Eretz Yisrael, the halopash. The Amar Reish Lakish, Lama Nikra Shma Mitzula, Shekol Meisei Mabul Nitztala Lusham. Even though it's true that there was a Mabul in Eretz Yisrael, but even according to Reish Lakish, the Mesim of the Mabul were low pash. They didn't end up staying there. The bodies flowed somewhere else. Lama Nikra Shma Mitzula. Why was Bavel called Mitzula? Because Shekol Meisei Mabul Nitztala Lusham. All of the bodies fell in Bavel. So that's a place you don't want to go. Rav Yochanan Amar Lama Nikra Shma Shinar. Why Rav Yochanan said, why was it called Shinar? Shekol Meisei Mabul Nina Rusham. And it's not a stira for Reish Lakish to say that. He just held that there was a Mabul, just wasn't a Mabul in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara, what does that show us? That shows us that even according to Reish Lakish, there were no Mesim in Eretz Yisrael. So says the Gemara, Efshar delo idbeku. It's not possible that there were none. He's a pragmatist. He's not buying the miraculous nature of the Mabul any more than he was already willing to say. And he says it has to be that there was at least some bodies that ended up staying in Eretz Yisrael. 3/4 of the way down, we'll be stopping in about 6 or 7 lines. Amar Rabbi Abo, Lama Nikra Shma Shinar, Shemina Eres Ashireha. Why was Bavel called Shinar? Because it would shake up the Ashireha. Rashi, a little bit more than halfway down, Dibra Maschil Shemina Eres Ashireha, Mipnei She'enon Mirachamim Al Habrios. The people in Bavel were not Mirachim Al Habrios. So what it does is it makes them not rich. Because if you're not nice to people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will not be mizake you with wealth, because you're clearly not being nice to people with your wealth. Says the Gemara, it's not true. We see that there are people in Bavel who are not nice. Says the Gemara, you're right, but tlasadare lo mashche. 3 generations of wealth is a sign, maybe the 4th generation, however you want to count. 3 generations of wealth won't last if you're not nice, but it will last if you are nice. Amar Rav Ami, Kol ha'ochel me'afara shel Bavel, anyone who eats from the dirt of Bavel, ki'ilu ochel b'sar avosav. It's as if they are consuming their ancestors, because so many people were buried there. Remember our drushas of Mitzula and our drushas of what was the other word? Of Shinar. So in both of those drushas, we see that people were buried in Bavel from the Mabul. And Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a brisa like this, that Kola ochel me'afara shel Bavel kilu ochel b'sar avosav, that it was as though they were consuming their ancestors because they were buried in those grounds. V'yesh omrim ki'ilu ochel shkatzim u'remasim. It was as if they were eating shkatzim u'remasim, one way or the other, not pretty. We're going to stop right here and pick up with Seir HaMishtalech tomorrow night. Again, we'll probably have a substitute tomorrow night because I have a couple of simchas to go to. And wishing you all a beautiful night.